Welcome everyone to this week's Living is Dying, and as always, we'd like to begin with acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and wherever you might be, and we recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So today's topic is something that is enormous. It's a topic of what we, in fact, well, we could say we could take our departure in what we discussed last week, which is taking refuge. And it's interesting when we say taking refuge, of course, it is a Buddhist term, but in fact, what we are talking about is something that goes beyond Buddhism. It's simply connecting with truth, connecting with reality. And we have to acknowledge that the way that we interact with reality always goes through a filter, which is ourselves, our consciousness. And the entire Buddhist path is really about eliminating that consciousness or that confusion that separates us from reality. We can say when reality is not properly understood, when consciousness is a bit lost, we have what we call samsara. When consciousness regains itself, you could say when it is no longer obscured, we have nirvana. And the entire path really is almost what we could call deprogramming ourselves. It is us connecting with reality beyond concepts. Of course, we need to, just like we could say you could say we're born naturally healthy, but then of course, due to all sorts of circumstances, we might have various illnesses and so on. And hopefully these being curable illnesses, then on the basis of medicine, we can restore our natural condition of health. And that's definitely the vision when we speak about when we approach the Buddhist teaching, is that there's an underlying condition of truth that's innate to ourselves, to all of reality. We can call it Mother Nature. This is the basic ground of our reality. And what we're doing on the Buddhist path is really just aligning ourselves with Mother Nature, with reality. And that we refer to when we engage in the path in becoming awake. And so we take refuge from the point of wishing to become awake, wishing to connect with truth. And while we have the Buddhist path as a vehicle for arriving at that truth, it's something that eventually the vehicle itself becomes, you could say, dispensable once we arrive at truth. So the truth in Buddhism is not something the Buddha invented or something Buddhist. It's really just that Buddha offered a way in which we could connect with truth. And that's what we're doing. Okay, I was asked to turn up the speaker volume. Okay. And that's what we do when we take refuge. Now, one of the things that is implicit in the path is, and what really prevents us from connecting with reality, is really our insecurity, our being entangled in this solidification of ourselves and the solidification of what we perceive. And that's where we have the vision of the Buddhist path of what we call selflessness, which is not something particularly mystical. It's rather that we get over ourselves, we begin to connect with a wider perspective, vipassana, that enables us to see beyond just the narrow confines of our personal agenda. And so us taking refuge is really connecting with this dimension of truth and beginning to discover through the practice of the path, not just through, you could say, becoming card-carrying, declared Buddhists, but we begin to, through the practice of the path, to connect with a wider reality beyond just our normal preoccupation with self. And of course, all this plays into what we're discussing here in terms of us dying, because what we're going to be carrying with us beyond the exhaustion of our physical framework, our body, is this mind. And when this mind is freed from the ordinary burden of the toxicity and the confusion of the self-centered mind, it stands for it stands so much better in terms of where our further journey goes. There's a very clear, you could say, science around understanding how the mind works and what happens with the mind when it's no longer bound to the present reference point of our body. And this is what we're doing here. So the Buddhist path is founded on this practice of connecting with that which lies beyond the ordinary self. And so the very nature of us engaging in the path, taking refuge, being committed to truth, and not just as something that we have as a sort of a belief system, but rather something we have in terms of us continually working with ourselves, working with the mind, understanding that we need to be proactive in terms of eliminating this confusion. The natural outcome is a greatness of mind that cares for others. It's a greatness of mind in which we're committed beyond ourselves. You could say the natural organic, the organic nature of our path, the organic nature of our vipassana, our wisdom, is the falling away of this self-centered agenda, the self-centered worries and hopes and so forth, and a much greater sense of participation, empathy, compassion for others. We could become aware of the world around us. And that's the organic growth for the practitioner, is simply this falling away of the concern for self, concern for one's own personal peace, and an increasing awareness of the suffering of the world. So that's where the natural extension of the taking refuge is what we call then the Bodhisattva path. And the Bodhisattva path is essentially that we are not just, you could say, looking at how the path naturally makes us nicer people, or you could say kinder persons, but actually a profound inspiration of seeing how much suffering there is in the world, that we actually commit to being there for others. So that's where it's not just that we're sort of there for others to the extent that we sort of happen to engage with others. And undoubtedly, anyone who practices the path, anyone who practices meditation, naturally gives rise to a magnanimity and a greatness that goes beyond just ordinary self-centering. But in this case, we actually take the consequence of this greatness of mind and commit ourselves to this path of selflessness. And this is what we refer to as the Bodhisattva Vow. So Khyentse Rinpoche, in his work here, he then, as the extension of the discussion of the taking refuge, he then goes on to speaking about the Bodhisattva Vow. So I'd like to see if I can see here. He says, if you decide you want to take refuge, why not make the most of the opportunity and make the Bodhisattva's vow at the same time? In most of the Mahayana traditions, actually, we do this jointly. We take refuge and we commit to the Bodhisattva path. We essentially would say that in the Mahayana, when we take refuge, it's not just that we're seeking refuge for our present situation, our present lifetime, but it's really until we attain complete enlightenment that we take refuge. And we do so with the awareness of the suffering of sentient beings everywhere. Through the Buddhist path, we become acutely aware of how everybody's suffering arises, how it arises in every micro moment of everybody's existence. And it is this ignorant condition, this being lost, from which we continually operate from a vantage point of self-centering. And so intrinsic to taking refuge, intrinsic to being on the path, there's an awareness, an increasing awareness of Where does our own suffering come from? Where does the suffering of others? When we look at the world and we see all the suffering there is, we see all the suffering on the news, we see the suffering in the faces of the politicians that are begging for us to trust them when they're so completely untrustable. and and we can see how sentient beings everywhere, they painfully operate from this place. And of course, we are in a good position to speak about this. Certainly I am, because every micro moment I am acutely aware of how my own personal nature is continually shaped by whether the degree to which this condition, this confused condition of insecurity and self-centering affects us. But through the practice of the path, there's a little bit of air, a little bit of ventilation and fresh air taking place, in which we see that maybe we're not obliged to continually abide by that. And we also see how around us, others naturally also thrive when they're not held back by this insecurity of self-centering. So we understand how universal it is. So as we take refuge, we do that with an awareness of how this actually is getting to the bottom of what drives suffering universally. Khyentse Rinpoche says, a bodhisattva is someone who consciously longs to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment and ultimate happiness, then dedicates their lives towards making that long-term goal a reality. If we look at the lives of the great sages in the past, and we really shouldn't think, oh, they were Asian, they were part of a different culture. We should think of this has nothing really to do with particular cultures or times or anything. It has to do with a universal disposition of greatness that, given the right circumstances and so forth, individuals have cultivated. Of course, it's particularly prominent in cultures in which there was a very clear science around this, but it's also prominent in our everyday life, where we meet persons that have greatness of mind, that are courageous, selfless. And we can also see extraordinary great heroes in our cultures, those that we universally admire for having this courage and selflessness. So that's where this is not necessarily the Bodhisattva is a very theoretical sort of entity. It's very much something that is continually a living, palpable condition and potential in ourselves. And so we needn't think, well, I can only do this if I go to a particular country and I isolate myself, or I do something extraordinary. And we can start right now. We can start right now with taking out the garbage, sort of whatever we might have been procrastinating about. We could serve others. We can make others happy so easily. So it's not something that we need to think about as something, a great project out there in the future. It's something that we could actually dedicate ourselves to every moment, anytime. But this needs to come from or rather it's greatly helped from when there's a clear moment from which we actually determine to commit ourselves to doing this. It's not just a vague project that we sort of like, if the sun is out and our belly is full, then this is Jamgon Kongtrul who says this, when your belly is full and someone smiles at you, it's easy to be a bodhisattva. But of course, the moment that we're dedicated, then it's not just about when we're in the mood for being compassionate, but it's really something that stays with us. Khyentse Rinpoche says all the great bodhisattvas of the past have taken the Bodhisattva vow, which is an even more powerful way of preparing for death than just taking refuge. So of course, our being committed to truth and sustaining that however we can, and deeply respecting the principle of truth, deeply respecting those that practice truth, that's augmented by also us being persons that already have engaged and integrated such a vision, and done so with a vision of caring, a vision of greatness, a vision of the plight and the cause of others. Rinpoche says, by vowing to guide all sentient beings to enlightenment, you become actively involved in the grandest of all spiritual visions. And we understand that we, other sentient beings, all have a place that is not contaminated by confusion. The basic ground is good. If it wasn't, then we wouldn't be able to appreciate goodness when we see it. If we were just like a motherboard, if we really were just, you could say, mechanistic, mechanistic phenomena, if we really just were, you could say, like robots, perhaps very sophisticated robots, then we wouldn't really have any sense of empathy. We wouldn't really have any sense of, what makes others happy or what makes ourselves happy. We wouldn't have any preference even for happiness. Let's say you're cleaning up your folder with photos on your computer, and you're about to delete some family photos. It's not as if your computer is saying, "Oh, you don't want to really delete those, do you?" The computer has. There's nothing in the computer that has even the slightest of such. We, on the other hand, we're throbbing with life. We're full of, yes, presently, as it's filtered through confusion, it might be some pretty, you could say, neurotic styles of emotionality, but we are full of consciousness, life, and so forth. And that's where we, at our ground, have a leaning towards goodness, happiness. And in our ground, you could say, the less confused we are, the more naturally compassionate we are. All of this speaks volumes about enlightenment as being the ground, the common denominator for all life. And it's that we then commit to. And the moment that we have this in our being, we're transformed individuals. And if we could have that as we move along from this life, this provides a vastly different experience, a vastly different person, vastly different subjectivity. This is a very big vision and undertaking. Like Rinpoche says, it's the grandest of all spiritual visions. And this is also not about spiritual vision in terms of us having some strange little spiritual project going or some secret little spiritual life. It's something that permeates all our actions every moment in which so there's never a time where this is reserved for sort of a secret corner. It's something that's present within our entire being throughout every moment. Rinpoche says, no matter how long it takes, no matter how many difficulties you must face, you willingly vow to die and be reborn billions of times in order to fulfill your goal. Now, you might take a moment of considering this. It's a bit more than just the sort of the Flying Dutchman scenario that you're just going to keep going on and on and on. It's more about connecting with a basic disposition that's not held back by the ordinary agendas that we habitually subscribe to and which drive our suffering. It's about us becoming free. And in becoming free, there's no end, there's no limit to the caring, the love, the dedication to others. It's quite simply the natural outcome of enlightenment is caring for others. We wouldn't want to be otherwise. We are saying here billions of lives. Yes, well, we're going to be around for a while. And during that time that we're around, well, what do you want to be? Do we want to suffer, perpetuating suffering, or do we want to engage in acting for others? Do we want to be sort of begging for little scraps of happiness here or there, or do we want to be distributing bliss and well-being to others? This is not just about us sort of getting a fat position as bodhisattvas, but it's really just about us shaping our future and being fully what we could be. Rinpoche says, making the Bodhisattva vow can also help you reassure yourself that you really have stepped onto the path of the Bodhisattva. Often we make this vow ceremonially in front of witnesses, but you can also make it entirely alone. It's up to you. And yes, we can, but yeah, we can do it alone. Of course, what Rinpoche is saying here, this is not about the externals. We shouldn't mistake the externals for the actual content. But the thing is, when you're having a beautiful meal, when you're drinking some beautiful tea, when you're having some good wine, you want to honor the quality of this. And it's on the basis of actually having a clean glass. You don't just take some very fine Margaux wine and just put it in your mug and down the hatch. It's actually about properly celebrating the value of something. And that's where it really makes a big difference if there is a particular ceremony. But then again, we shouldn't be limited. We shouldn't think, well, we don't have all the circumstances, so we can't do it. That's obviously not, that's not the nature of what we're doing here. Today, we're going to take the Bodhisattva vow together. Rinpoche has some beautiful liturgy in here, and we're going to take the Bodhisattva vow together. And like last time, if there's some way in which you could celebrate this, maybe having a flower or having some incense, or having, and also just having an upbeat mind, a mind that's sort of pulls itself out of a dark place and perks up, appreciates the goodness that's basic to ourselves, that's basic to the nature of our reality. Of course, yes, there's a lot of confusion out there, but that's exactly why we want to do what we're doing here. So that's where, to take this vow, and those who take the vow of bodhisattvas, they continue doing so every day. Just like when you take refuge, we would keep taking refuge every day. I think I mentioned last time, at least 3 times we repeat this. Although, of course, the purpose or the point or the logic behind taking refuge is that we are curable. Our confusion is not basic to who we are. And similarly, also taking the vow of the bodhisattva, the implication is recognizing Buddha nature in ourselves and others and serving that. But it does make a difference if there is something that kind of invokes a particular atmosphere that you could say aligns us with this direction that we're taking. We're taking a direction, we're being proactive, we're going somewhere. Rinpoche says, if you decide to make the vow formally, sit cross-legged with a straight back. Slouching is kind of half-hearted. If we're engaging with others, then slouching usually sort of implies that we're kind of like, yeah, we're somewhat reserved. But if we're unreserved, we sit fully, you could say, we're perky, we're cheerful, we're wholehearted. We sit with a straight back. You don't have to sit cross-legged on the floor, you can sit on a chair. But the thing is that the back is actually straight. That actually, our whole psychology, our whole body language prompts us to be straight, honest, not just straight in a sort of a rigid way, but in a wholehearted, direct way, that we are fully participating in life. He says, if you would rather do it informally and don't want to sit cross-legged, make it as you walk around or as you sit in your office. Again, it's up to you which method you use. So again, as you can hear, Rinpoche makes a very important point, is that this is in no way limited to just the external framework. Yes, if you're walking around, if we could even just think of this when we're walking, then there's no reason why we shouldn't, be taking the Bodhisattva vow. You should never think, okay, I've taken the Bodhisattva vow, that's it for today. We could very well be walking. We could be sitting in our office. There's never a time where we can't, you could say, re-engage this vision. Start by arousing the two crucial aspects of bodhicitta in your mind. Okay, bodhicitta, I think most of you probably are familiar with this term by now, but it is essentially means the heart of awakening. So the heart of awakening is essentially the enlightened quality within ourselves that we are presently engaging with. We're aspiring to it. We're married to it. We're cultivating this. This is what makes us tick. So that's where it has two aspects. We can talk of it in various ways, but certainly when it comes to the way that we think of ourselves and our interaction with others, there's two ways in which we can think of this. And that is your ultimate goal, which is to awaken all sentient beings from enlightenment by bringing them to enlightenment. That is the first aspect. Keeping that in mind, what's our goal? What's our purpose? What's our aspiration? And so we call this the Bodhicitta of aspiration. It is, what do we want to do? Well, we definitely want to make a living. We definitely want to serve our family, our friends. We want to pay taxes. We want to be participants in the community, etc. We might also want to play bowling, or we want to maybe play golf, or we want to play bridge and all of that. Yeah, that's all good. But the real underlying spirit of who we are is informed by this wish, this aspiration that we wish to ultimately, what we're here for, our purpose of our existence is to awaken all sentient beings, to bring them to enlightenment. And the other one is the determination never to stop working towards making universal enlightenment a reality. So the first is the wish. The second is to actually do it, to actually go there. So that's where we, on one hand, we would say the first one is informed by what we call the four boundless. These are universal to all the Buddhist traditions. But in the Mahayana particularly, we refer to them as the four boundless because the scope is boundless sentient beings, countless sentient beings. Okay, I hope the volume is the sound okay, by the way. Can you hear me? I'm actually sitting here alone in this room, rather loud. It's good thing I don't have neighbors. They will think, what is he on about? Well, maybe, hopefully it's something worthwhile, but anyway, okay, so the sound is good. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. All right, so we talk about the four boundless because the object of this are all sentient beings, which are countless. Sentient beings are countless. That's also why Rinpoche says billions of lifetimes. That's sort of a moderate estimate. It's like, where does the universe end? When did time begin? We just need to look up at the sky, and right away we can actually see that our assumptions about limitations falls apart. Every little child that looks up at the sky and asks, where does it end? They're onto reality. They're onto the nature of reality. It's almost like we have a big symbol of the infinitude that goes beyond time and space concepts. That's all around us, that we breathe and that we move within. And that similarly also goes for the number of sentient beings. So we direct this four sentiments towards the infinitude of sentient beings, which is we're dedicated to their happiness through kindness. We're dedicating to alleviating their suffering through compassion. We're dedicating to wishing them well, joy. We're dedicating to all sentient beings equally. So these we call the four boundless. The actual walk, that is the stuff of the entire path really, can be defined in terms of six ways of acting. The sixth one is the question of whether it's acting, but there are 6 actions that actually take us beyond the ordinary insecurity of self. And it starts at a very, you could say, pedestrian, mundane, immediate dimension, which is the practice of generosity, giving in all its aspects. Then there's discipline, that we're actually committed to doing what's right. Then there's patience, that we're not going to fall into resenting what is, but we're going to be patient with reality as it is. Then there's the joy of acting with enthusiasm, with vigor. Then there's a very profound practice that enables us to actually oil the machinery of our mind, which is meditation, providing peace in which something extraordinary can emerge. And that's the sixth one, which is insight, wisdom, prajna. So these are linked together as the very nature of the integration of the Bodhisattva path, the actual application. So these two are essential. These two aspects of the aspect of aspiration through what we call the four boundless, and the application through these what we call six paramitas, or acts that take us beyond. So that's how we begin with taking the Bodhisattva vow. Then Rinpoche says, promise wholeheartedly never to stop working towards the realization of bodhicitta, and declare unequivocally that nothing and no one will ever get in your way, not death and not rebirth. So this is again big. It's not about us just sort of thinking, okay, I'm doing this now, there seems to be, makes a lot of sense. But it's that we're committed to this beyond today and tomorrow and next year, beyond this lifetime, the next lifetime. It's simply what becomes the very nature of our being. This, of course, is something that requires that we're kind to ourselves. This should never become a moralistic project. I should be a bodhisattva. The very nature of the Buddhist path is that the Buddha took into account that we are what we are, and we presently are rather caught up in ourselves. There's a saying that goes, a man all wrapped up in himself makes for a very small packet. And that's the truth of the matter. We have to start where we are. But the thing is, we can do something about this. And that is where we can engage in understanding the nature of who we are. There's an actual science around this. There's an actual understanding to arrive at. Not stuff we were taught in school, but there is the teachings that come from the Buddha. And we combine this with an application of non-confusion, an integration, and a continual exercise that connects us beyond the ordinary, you could say, habitual patterns that perpetuate our, you could say, smallness and confusion and narrowness. And that's the practice of meditation. Meditation is what takes us out of our heads. It's what takes us out of our ordinary narratives. It's what connects us beyond just the ordinary, you could say, entanglement in our own beliefs and our own patterning. So that's why meditation is immensely important for us to have a great vision. If we just have a great vision, it becomes like, wow, that's a great idea. And, and then we become idealists. And, and there's very often the sort of the cynicism, like Churchill says, you'd what is it again? You'd be a poor person if you weren't an idealist before you're 30. And you'd be a strange person if you weren't a capitalist once you're over 30. I'm terribly misquoting him, but the implication is that young people are idealistic. And then as you get older, you become jaded and sad and depressed, and all that's left is your money or whatever, gratification, And that's where we absolutely, when we have the vision of the Bodhisattva path and the wish to benefit others, we need to sustain that with the practice of meditation, the practice of actually being aware of what's happening in our mind and not being entangled with it. Once we have a foundation of such a foundation of meditation, yes, then all the various practices that we have in the Buddhist path and something like the Bodhisattva vow becomes very, because it becomes an organic outcome. So that's where, yes, we're engaging in something vast, but we have the methods for to engage with this realistically. So that's where Rinpoche says then, however enormous the task involved, you are absolutely determined to accomplish the enlightenment of all sentient beings, come what may. Your determination is so great that your own death at the end of this life will be little more than a hiccup in the process and will not affect your overall plan one iota. So we shouldn't think small. We should think big. We should think, yes, I can do this. We might habitually be sort of inclined towards modesty and no, I can't do this and all that kind of stuff. But here, that really doesn't have a place. It's about us being perfectly clear about the value of this and our determination, commitment to this. So this takes us to then the actual Bodhisattva vow. And we're first going to talk a little bit about I'm going to be going through some of the liturgies here. And the first one here is really the very beautiful quintessential liturgy. And it comes from the way of the Bodhisattva and from Shantideva, a great Bodhisattva. And this really sets the mood for what exactly it is that we're talking about here. And it says, just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step abode and trained, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring birth to the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. So what constitutes the place of awakening really is that we go beyond the ordinary agendas of self, and that is the awakened mind. And then having generated that we actually engage in the training, like we looked before, the aspiration and the application. That's the training. And so this is what we then commit to, and we do so really not just for our own enlightenment, but really looking around us, being aware of what's happening in the larger community in this world. Rinpoche says, in fact, as the vast majority of sentient beings are absolutely terrified of dying, why not turn your own fear of death into a path? The entire the path of the Buddha is premised on skillful means that enable this innate disposition, what we could call wisdom, to manifest. So we always think of the Buddhist path in terms of what we call wisdom and skillful means. Skillful means is that we take what is, no matter how confused we are, no matter what kind of disposition we have, the Buddhist path is designed to take that into account. It takes it into account. The greater you could say, the higher or the more profound the teachings are, the more they're able to integrate any aspect of who we are. But right from the start, really, the Buddhist path is premised on us, or rather is premised on accommodating who we are now. Not something in the future, but who we actually are. So even just the practice of sitting meditation is taking into the account that we have a strong, we're very much ruled by our physicality, and to provide the ideal conditions for this very sort of somatic physical situation of ours, well, we bring the body onto the path. We bring meditation onto the path. We bring others onto the path, and so forth. Now, in this case, the skillful means consists of highlighting that we will inevitably have fear of death. And we probably have it now. We're uncomfortable with death. And that's a rather unfortunate thing, because we're all heading there, the implication of the title of this book. So that's where we are turning this into a path. This is a place where we are actually, again, coming back to a primary commitment. But again, we're not just about ourselves, but we're taking the discomfort that we had about this leap from this life. We're taking that as part of the inspiration for then generating this greatness of mind. And it's also understanding that it's not just us who go through this, everybody goes through this. Again, we have a shared common cause with all sentient beings. Rinpoche says, think to yourself, all sentient beings live under the shadow of the fear of death. May I take on all their fear myself. I know this life is nearly over. I know that I will die soon, and I know that in the future I will experience death 1,000,000 times over. But whatever happens, may my wish to enlighten all sentient beings and my bodhisattva activities never wane. I am a bodhisattva. I am a child of the Buddha. Like all sentient beings, I have Buddha nature. The difference is that I know I have Buddha nature, whereas most other sentient beings do not. Fully equipped with the Buddha's precious Dharma, I will joyfully fulfill my duty as a bodhisattva and bring all sentient beings to enlightenment. When we say I'm a child of the Buddha, it's not like the Buddha is sort of a father figure in the sense of, or parental figure, and we sort of like to snuggle up. As a bodhisattva, we're going to be sort of looked after by the Buddha. It's more that we're heirs. It's more that our dad ran a bakery, and now the dad passed away, we are going to run the bakery, or whatever it might be. We're heirs to a heritage of greatness, of courage, and we're going to carry that on. It's in that sense that we're a child of the Buddha. That's implication of the bodhisattva. It's not somebody who's looking to the Buddha as well. Yes, definitely looking to the Buddha for guidance, but also someone who carries the awakened inspiration of the Buddha. What's implicit here is that we can do this because we are legally the heirs to this business. It's in our name, it's in our DNA. And that's what we essentially mean with Buddha nature. Buddha nature, interestingly, in Sanskrit, it's gotra. And in Tibetan, it's rik, which means family. And it really just means that we belong to the Buddha family, as do all sentient beings. We have this DNA, this disposition that's basic. And we share this with all sentient beings. But like Rinpoche says here, the difference is that we're familiar with this quality of the unconditional. And this is what we cultivate through the path. And it's this we live by. It's this that we commit to, and which we aspire to, and which we essentially make the core of our being. So as such, we're completely equipped to, you could say, uphold the activity of the bodhisattva and serve sentient beings. Rinpoche says, in the same way that there are many traditional refuge prayers to choose from, there are also many bodhicitta practices, like the following practice from Taiwan. So here then it says, in the great treatise of the perfection of wisdom, Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, love and compassion are included in the 4 immeasurables. They're called love immeasurable and compassion immeasurable, respectively. The 4 immeasurables here we have the Bodhisattva. I think not sure if it's Avalokiteshvara or Manjushri. Here we have another Bodhisattva, somebody who's filling up for us. And another Bodhisattva who might be acting in ways that we have no idea. We actually, this is actually something that we often say, we do not know who is a Bodhisattva. We can't actually judge others. We never know who is a Bodhisattva. And the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, could very well manifest as a little squirrel somehow. Maybe just one day that we're feeling a bit sort of moody and blue, and we look out and there's a little squirrel, scurrying around and gathering acorn. And that might just touch us. You could say awaken a soft spot. So the four immeasurables that we talked about is a very important daily practice in Tibetan Buddhism. Many Tibetan Buddhists recite it for their whole life. The four immeasurables. This is where we chant this so often. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that has no suffering. May all sentient beings live in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. We chant this so often. Now you have it also, for example, when we do the Jamgun Mipan, which is Treasury of Blessings, it's in there after we chant the refuge 3 times, and before we begin the practice, we chant these 4. The Bodhisattva Vow. So at this point, actually, I'll chant these 4 here, and then I'll go back to the lines that we had earlier, and then chant them 3 times. But at that point, then, we are rather, at this point now, is that we should actually think we're taking the Bodhisattva Vow together. So please think, just like when we take refuge, we think of the presence of the Buddha. We think as a representation of the Dharma, of all the teachings the Buddha gave. We just think of the countless scriptures that exist, particularly in the Tibetan tradition. These are beautifully wrapped, and we usually think of them as sort of sitting like a bit like a library. And then also we have as the Sangha, representatives of the Bodhisattva Sangha and representatives of the Sangha of those who aspire to individual liberation. So we have on one hand, one side we have the monastics, and on the other hand, the Bodhisattvas. And these represent the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So if we just take a moment, just consider that they're there, then think, I'm now going to commit to establishing all sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment. So first we generate this presence with the help of visualization. Sentient beings are countless. I vow to deliver them all. Afflictions are endless. I vow to eradicate them all. Dharma means are immeasurable. I vow to learn them all. Buddha Bodhi is unsurpassed. I vow to attain it. These are called the 4 vast vows. And the next, always walking the Bodhisattva path. May the 3 kinds of hindrances and all afflictions be eliminated. May I gain wisdom and true understanding. May all hindrances caused by negative thoughts and actions be removed. May I always walk the Bodhisattva path, life after life. So now we'll take the Bodhisattva vow on the basis of these lines up here. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step abode and trained, likewise for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step, abode and trained, likewise for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step, have abode and trained, likewise, for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide and train myself. So now we consider that we have taken the Bodhisattva vow, and the value of this is immeasurable. And so we do something we always do, so that we never think that, here I am, I've done something wonderful, but rather we think, I've done something wonderful and I give it away. So we dedicate. We chant, may the merit and virtue accrued from this work be dedicated to, and then we think of whoever it is that we're doing this on behalf of, the name of the deceased, requite the fourfold kindness from above and relieve the suffering of the 3 life paths below. May all those who see and hear of this activate bodhicitta, and when this retribution body is over, be born together in the land of ultimate bliss. So thus we dedicate. And also what we do when we conclude practice after we dedicate is we make aspirations. Having done something of great value, this very powerful moment, then we make aspirations. We aspire. I wish to be reborn in the Western Pure Land. I wish to have the lotus of 9 grades as my parents. When the flower opens, I will see the Buddha and realize that dharmas have no birth. The bodhisattvas who never regress will be my companions. So in this way, we aspire. Now, everything we're doing here is essentially a practice of magnanimity, greatness of mind. And what's very beautiful implicit in this is when we cultivate magnanimity, there's not a notion, well, there is inevitably, that we think, oh, I'm doing something great. But eventually this becomes less and less. There's less and less self-consciousness around what we're doing in terms of doing something good. The beauty of the Bodhisattva is not just that they do something great, but they also don't really think of it, other than they just do this organically. They're inspired by the bliss. They have the wisdom to know the value of it, but they don't have the insecurity of continually going back and checking, oh, I did something great. Was that acknowledged? Did I get some applause? Did I hear some recognition there? Etc., etc. All the sort of ways in which we could say very beautiful gestures, very often because of these strings that are attached, they somehow become diminished. Somebody does a beautiful gesture, but then they expect to be thanked or get a little memorial mention of some sort. And that's where beautiful acts can sometimes be diminished through the sort of this sort of expectation of being thanked. And that's where the Bodhisattva has this magnanimity that is free from that. So this is where what's implicit in this project is the thinking big. Rinpoche says, from a Buddhist point of view, the best way to prepare for death is to enter into the immense vision of bodhicitta and to think big. By doing so, the power of your practice will escalate exponentially. One of the main problems most of us have with our view of life and death is that we don't think big. Too many of us, even Buddhists, are small-minded and petty. By arousing and applying bodhicitta, our limited perception of the world and everything in it becomes far more expansive. Small-minded people only think about themselves, this life, and their immediate environment. On the few occasions they manage to think beyond themselves, it is rarely further than their own family. Only when death draws near do such people begin to realize just how narrow and selfish their lives have been, how few of their achievements had any real or lasting value, and how many of their projects that took up so much of their time and energy were either entirely insignificant or failed to come to fruition. From this point of view, if there were just one life, death really would be a now or never situation. So is it any wonder that at death, the small-minded are convinced that they're doomed to eternal failure? What they lack is long-term vision and purpose that ranges over many lifetimes. If they were to develop the determination to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment, however many lifetimes it takes, they would feel quite differently. So try to think beyond your immediate circle of family and friends. Develop a genuine concern for the welfare of all living beings, including strangers and especially your enemies. And bear in mind that in the context of the ultimate goal of a bodhisattva, taking care of the welfare of others is far more than merely making sure that everyone has enough to eat or a roof over their heads. Caring for others is to fervently wish and pray that every single sentient being attains enlightenment. By making this wish again and again, your view will gradually become more and more expansive. This is how you learn to think big. So we're concluding the text for today, but if anyone has any comments or questions, you're very welcome to ask. I'm not sure I could answer them, but you're welcome. Are there any Bodhisattva precepts from Vajrayana tradition? Yes, the entire Vajrayana is based on the Bodhisattva precepts. And the whole Vajrayana is really you could say the courageous integration of Buddha nature. So the Vajrayana is entirely based on what the Bodhisattva vow is all about. Vajrayana is really like the rest of the Mahayana, all about bringing forth Buddha nature. It's bringing forth Buddha nature from the point of view that it spontaneously abides as what we truly are, and simply acknowledging that. But that Buddha nature can only be known by the mind of Bodhicitta, can only be known by that which goes beyond the ordinary entanglements of confusion. So the entire Mahayana is fueled by this insight into Buddha nature, and it is that which you could say the general Buddhist teaching unveils gradually, and which the Vajrayana operates with from the point of view of being something that's already spontaneously present within ourselves. So they're completely, you could say, integral. But are there any precepts per se, like don't eat meat? You know, all along the line in the Buddhist teaching, there's the concern for others. So there's many people who take vows not to eat meat, and that's you know that's across, you know, that's not just Vajrayana, but also the general Buddhist path everywhere. But that's very much an individual choice. You know, like for example, in the Theravadan tradition in Thailand, when the monastics go begging, they actually can't choose whether or not it's going to be meat or not meat that they get. And we also sometimes hear that all Tibetans eat meat. Well, that's not true. There are many Tibetans actually who are vegetarian. But it's not necessarily part of the vows that we take, even though there will be many great practitioners that vow to not eat meat. Yeah, both in the Theravadan tradition and the Vajrayana tradition and so forth. What is enlightenment from the Bodhisattva's point of view? That's a very good question. It's the what we call non-abiding enlightenment. It's that which is neither nirvana nor samsara. The Bodhisattva is someone who doesn't abide in confusion And it's also somebody who is not interested in going into a place of personal peace. And so the Bodhisattva doesn't abide in that, you could say, confusion that originates from the self-centering, that on one hand gets entangled in confusion, and then, as you could say, the other extreme is wishing, oh gosh, if only I was out of here and had personal peace. The Bodhisattva completely eliminates the whole notion of that sort of confused position. And as such, the Bodhisattva abides in wisdom, and from that wisdom continually serving spontaneously sentient beings. So we would say this is what we call the non-abiding nirvana, and it really consists of, we would say, the outcome of the Mahayana path, or what we call the two kayas, the Dhammakaya of wisdom, of enlightenment, which benefits the individual, and the Rupakaya, the manifesting for others out of compassion. Okay. So this concludes today's, and I'd like to say that next time we're going to be looking at chapter 6, the painful dying of the painful bardo of dying. That's the next chapter, and this actually coincides very auspiciously, if you like, with that presently, and that began today. Tsongsa Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche's teachings on the bardo. So Rinpoche taught that today, and you will find the links sitting on the Siddhartha Intent website. If you click on that, it will take you to the recording. It happened today from 12:30 to approximately, I think, towards 3 o'clock. And tomorrow, and also Tuesday, Rinpoche will be teaching again from 12:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Sydney time. So everything is coming together in that sense. So please make use of this extraordinary opportunity, Rinpoche teaching, and this will then sort of connect with what we'll look at next time. Okay. Thank you very much for participating in today's study and celebration of Rinpoche's teaching, and we'll just conclude with dedication. Oh, hold on. Let me just bring it up. This virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve, and at the time of our death, each of us may find ease in dying and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakob.
Thanks, Jakob.
Thank you, Turing. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you.